Hello and welcome back. I'm Joshua Barnes and you're watching NewsX World. Let's first take a look at our headlines. US Senate Republicans have narrowly passed President Trump's sweeping tax cut and spending bill, with JD Vance casting a tie-break vote. The bill will now head to the House, with Trump wanting it signed into law by July the 4th. Meanwhile, Donald Trump says that Israel have agreed to a 60-day Gaza ceasefire, with the US president urging Hamas to commit to what he called a final proposal. Further military action has been reported in the Gaza Strip. Israel has threatened to respond after it intercepted a suspected Houthi missile fired from Yemen, targeting an Israeli airport. Israel's defense minister was speaking after the first such strike since the end of the conflict with Iran. Meanwhile, EU Foreign Policy Chief Kaja Kallas has urged Iran to resume nuclear talks, saying that the EU will facilitate the return to diplomacy. Iran have previously said that it needs more time before resuming talks, particularly with the US. French President Emmanuel Macron has spoken with his Russian counterpart Vladimir Putin for the first time in almost 3 years, discussing a potential Ukraine ceasefire and the Israel-Iran conflict. Meanwhile, the US says it won't send some pledged weapons to Kyiv. Tibetan spiritual leader, the Dalai Lama, says the centuries-old Tibetan Buddhist institution will continue after his death, ending years of speculation that he might be the last person to hold the role. The Quad Group of the United States, India, Japan and Australia have condemned the devastating Pahalgam terror attack of April the 22nd, calling on the perpetrators to be brought to justice. However, they stopped short of mentioning Pakistan in the joint statement. And UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer's new welfare bill has passed through the House of Commons, though further concessions were made at the 11th hour after a continued in-party rebellion over the impact on poverty levels. We start this hour with the United States, which is poised to impose tough tariffs on nations still doing business with Russia 3 years after the Russia-Ukraine conflict began. Senator Lindsey Graham says US President Donald Trump has thrown his support behind a bill that would slap a 500% tariff on imports from countries like India and China that continue buying Russian goods. Speaking to media, Graham said Trump encouraged him to bring the bill to a vote after the July break. The bill, which has already gained 84 co-sponsors, is designed to pressure countries to stop purchasing Russian oil, a move meant to undercut President Vladimir Putin's war economy and force him to negotiate. Graham stated that India and China purchase 70% of Putin's oil. They're keeping his war machine running. This bill gives the US president the power to respond with tariffs, and Trump supposedly supports it. The bill, first introduced in March, was held up due to White House resistance to expanding sanctions, but with shifting views in Washington, it is now expected to be tabled in August. If enacted, the legislation could hit India hard. As the world's third largest oil importer, India buys around 5.1 million barrels of crude daily, much of it from Russia, and refines it into petrol and diesel. Well, joining us on the programme to discuss the potential ramifications, not just for Russia, but also other countries that buy their oil, is Ross Finegold, a political analyst who is joining us from Taipei. Ross, as always, thank you ever so much for being here with us. I'm going to ask you a two-pronged question here. Of course, we've heard about this potential sanction on third parties that buy Russian oil from the US for a while. One, why do you think this shift has happened? And two, how devastating could the impact be on a Russian economy that is also ongoing in a war?
Well, there are a number of people in the U.S. Congress, both in the Senate and the House, who've been very strong supporters of Ukraine throughout the last 3 years of Russia's invasion. Senator Lindsey Graham of South Carolina is one of those senators, and he's trying to push this bill into law. So it comes as no surprise that he's leading the effort. He's been very outspoken in his support for Ukraine. And although there's certainly some members of the U.S. Congress who have a more Trump kind of view, which is skepticism towards aiding Ukraine. And President Trump himself, obviously, he's made a lot of effort to try and bring about a ceasefire between Ukraine and Russia, although so far unsuccessfully. But the desire to support Ukraine still exists in the U.S. Congress, and that's why members of Congress have come forward with this proposal. Now, have to keep in mind that the wording, if it does pass, will probably include broad language that allows the President of the United States to waive those tariffs if the President deems it to be in the interest of the United States. So it's easy for President Trump to say that he supports this bill because it could pass and he could sign it into law, and then he could still waive those 500% tariffs if he thinks it's necessary to do so. Obviously, to get to the second part of your question, if the United States was to impose 500% tariffs on trading partners like India or China, it would be devastating on those countries, and those countries would have no choice but to stop buying oil and energy from Russia. And if they stop buying energy from Russia, then Russia is going to lose one of its main sources of income at the moment, and it could devastate their war effort.
On this topic for a moment, and first of all, I want to look at the global impact. Of course, we've seen Trump's tariffs and Trump's levies have huge impacts on global markets, on global businesses. What would a tariff of this extremity on a commodity like oil that is so vital to so much infrastructure and normal everyday life, what impact would that have on the global economic scale?
That's a really good question, but I don't think we really know the answer. There are obviously alternative sources of oil. President Trump could put pressure on countries like Saudi Arabia and the other Gulf countries to increase production in order to avoid any price increase that might occur if India and China were to stop buying Russian oil. So that's a bit of an unknown at the moment, but there are possible solutions. But certainly, again, I think the key point here is not what might happen to the price of oil. It really is what would happen if Russia was cut off from the financial flows, from the income that it gets from China and India, which still buy its oil.
Yes, and Ross, finally on this topic, we've seen Trump's posturing, Trump's rhetoric being used to try and get people to the negotiating table. Is this directly a push towards Russia agreeing to a ceasefire in the war with Ukraine?
Yeah, I think that's accurate. If this does pass and passes the Congress and President Trump signs it into law, it will be a very new and possibly effective tool that President Trump could have to persuade Russia and Ukraine to reach a ceasefire. We know that President Trump has been actively trying to get a ceasefire throughout his term in office since January of this year. He's failed at that so far. It's clearly frustrated him, and he's made that clear publicly in some of his comments. Sometimes his comments are directed at Russia, and sometimes his comments are directed at Ukraine. But the interesting thing here is, if we game this out, if this becomes law, and President Trump could waive it as part of a ceasefire arrangement, then Russia is also going to be asking for other types of sanctions to be removed. So what comes to mind here is the possibility of a broader deal, but at its heart would have to be a ceasefire.
Yes, Ross, stay with us as we stay with President Donald Trump, who says he will not extend the July 9 deadline for higher tariffs on countries he claims are ripping off the United States, renewing threats against Japan and other key trading partners. Here is what Trump said.
No, I'm not thinking about the pause. I'll be writing letters to a lot of countries, and I think you're just starting to understand.
Well, Trump also said he's not thinking about the pause and plans to send letters notifying countries of new tariff rates, possibly as high as 35% for Japan, far above the 10% paused in April. Trump lashed out at Japan for blocking US rice imports and maintaining a huge auto trade imbalance. They're spoiled, he said, adding he doubts a deal can be reached. Let's listen into those comments.
We've dealt with Japan. I'm not sure if we're going to make a deal. I doubt it with Japan. They're very tough. You have to understand they're very spoiled. I love Japan. I really like the new Prime Minister, too. Abiy was one of my closest friends. As you know, the new Prime Minister is great. He's a very strong guy. But they and others are so spoiled from having ripped us off for 30, 40 years that it's really hard for them to make a deal. You know, it's very hard.
But he struck a more hopeful tone on India, saying a deal could soon come if India agrees to lower barriers for American goods. Trump said right now India doesn't accept anybody in. If they do, we'll make a deal with far less tariffs. Let's listen to that comment.
I think we're going to have a deal with India, possibly. And that's going to be a different kind of a deal. It's going to be a deal where we're able to go in and compete. Right now, India doesn't accept anybody in. I think India is going to do that, and if they do that, we're going to have a deal for much less tariffs. Thank you for telling me, by the way.
Meanwhile, Indian Foreign Minister S. Jaishankar, currently in the United States, confirmed talks are in an advanced stage, but warned of unresolved issues around auto parts, steel and agriculture. With just days left, the White House is prioritising a deal with India, while Trump sharpens pressure on Japan and signals more hardline letters could follow. Ross, I'm going to bring you back in, and I'd like to broaden our discussion, not just on India, Japan, but also these other nations. Of course, Trump's 90-day pause has given respites for many countries as they look to work towards a deal. Again, on Trump's rhetoric, do you think this is Trump's final push to get a deal done, or is he really serious about implementing his Liberation Day tariffs? And then what will that impact be? We saw the markets completely fluctuate after his initial announcement.
I think it could be a combination. There are some countries and trading partners that President Trump, to be fair to him, that he genuinely wants to reach a deal with. There definitely is a number of countries that are priority countries for negotiations. That includes Japan, India, obviously China, Taiwan has had several rounds of negotiations as well. So it's clear that the administration has prioritized negotiations with several countries. But at the same time, the negotiating teams from the U.S. side, they can't talk to 200 countries and territories simultaneously. There's just too many of them. So it's also very possible that while Trump has, in his mind, a list of countries that he wants to prioritize, there are going to be a list of countries that very well might have the Liberation Day tariffs imposed on July 9th. And those countries are just, for a variety of reasons, are just not a priority for President Trump. The trade volumes might be small. President Trump might lack a strong personal relationship with the leaders of those countries. Could be other factors. But I think we're going to see some deals. We might see a pause on tariff implementation with countries that are engaged in negotiations. And then there could be a large number of countries that are going to face higher tariffs on July 9th. And they'll just have to stand in line for a negotiation. It's not going to happen quickly.
Yes, Ross, we're now going to stay in North America, and the US government has officially shut down its foreign aid agency, marking a dramatic shift in America's global development strategy. On July the 1st, the Trump administration closed the US Agency for International Development, also known as USAID, calling it the end of a charity-based model that the president believes no longer serves US interests. Secretary of State Marco Rubio, who led the effort to dismantle the agency, slashed 85% of its programs and merged its operations into the State Department. Rubio defended the move, calling USAID bloated and outdated, and claimed it symbolized government waste. He said the agency was rightly targeted in a wider cost-cutting campaign driven by billionaire Elon Musk. Founded in 1961 by President John F. Kennedy to win hearts and minds of the developing world during the Cold War, USAID played a crucial role in global health, disaster relief and poverty reduction for more than 6 decades. The decision sparked an outpouring of criticism from former leaders and global figures. Former Presidents George W. Bush and Barack Obama, along with activists and U2 frontman Bono, sent a farewell message to staff praising their work and warning that the agency's mission remains essential. Obama, who seldom publicly criticizes Trump, called the move inexplicable and a colossal mistake. adding that gutting US aid is a tragedy. It's some of the most important work happening anywhere in the world. A study published in The Lancet warns that the foreign aid cuts could lead to over 14 million deaths by 2030, including millions of children, if key programs in health and development are not restored. Well, Ross Finegold back with us once again. We've heard conflicting comments, as we do with a lot of Donald Trump's policies, which aren't always popular across the board. People calling out, including George W. Bush and Barack Obama, this move to cut US aid. Is it as simple as Donald Trump is putting America first, or is it an oversight really on the impact that US aid has and the potential devastation it could cause for areas facing famine, civil war and other disasters?
I think this is a matter of President Trump's America First approach to foreign policy. He simply doesn't feel that the U.S. taxpayer should be funding the aid for other countries at this level or this dollar amount. That's why the dollar amount will be dramatically reduced. There'll still be some foreign aid that will be operated out of the State Department with the end of USAID. But President Trump has an America First policy, and clearly he's decided that this does not include providing the aid for whether humanitarian aid, disaster relief, other types of health and education programs that USAID was involved in for so many decades. You know, we should keep in mind that elections have consequences. President Trump was elected, and these are his policies. It really should come as no surprise. A future U.S. president might very well reinstate USAID or under that name or some other type of program. But the consequence of electing President Trump in the foreign policy space includes the end of USAID. And that's just the reality, and other countries are going to have to step into that space.
Yes, absolutely. I'm glad you brought up other countries stepping into that space. Who do you think could fill the gap that the American financial support will be leaving?
It's going to have to be countries with the financial ability to do so. So that would include several of the Western European countries. Certainly France and Germany come to mind. Here in East Asia, Japan and South Korea are very wealthy countries. They certainly have the financial ability. In Oceania, Australia has long been an aid provider to the Pacific Island countries, and they will continue to do that. China has been increasingly using its financial capabilities as well, notably in Africa. So I would expect we'll see China doing more of that, although there's always criticism about China's aid programs and especially China's willingness to fund infrastructure programs, because that always winds up into a discussion about debt trap for the recipient countries. But there are countries with the ability to step in, and we'll see if they're willing to do so, if they're going to follow an America First policy of their own and not do so.
Yes, Ross, before we move on to our next topic, we've heard, of course, some of the outcry from leading former figures in US politics. But with current US politicians, how do you think that this will be received? Could this lead to further discussion? And is there any chance that this move could be pulled back?
There's no chance that this move could be pulled back. I do think there's some more, we call them establishment Republicans, especially in the Senate, more so than in the House of Representatives, who probably oppose this. They would have preferred AID continues to exist. Maybe they would have reduced funding. Maybe they would have done more to eliminate waste, fraud, and corruption, which does exist. It exists in the international humanitarian space. That's just the reality. But they're not going to fight President Trump over this. That's clear. So the reality is that AID is disappearing into the State Department, and U.S. foreign aid will be given, but at much lower levels than in the past.
Ross, absolutely. If you stay with us, we're going to stay now in North America and look at a feud that has been rolling on for previous weeks, but a new development as Elon Musk has praised President Donald Trump for successfully resolving several serious conflicts around the world. This despite their ongoing public spat. Musk posted a message on X crediting Trump for the reported 60-day ceasefire deal in Gaza, sharing a Truth Social post in which Trump claimed Israel had agreed to the terms. This comes after Trump threatened to shut shop on Musk and told him to go back home, accusing the Tesla CEO of benefiting from massive government subsidies. Trump said Musk had received more subsidies than any human in history and suggested he could be investigated by the Doge unit. Well, Ross, thanks for sticking here. This could potentially be a move away from this public feud that both Elon Musk and Donald Trump have been engaged in. Do you think this is another moment of duality in a relationship that has seen ups and downs in recent months, or could this be a turning tide, and what does that mean for the US?
It's certainly possible that they could be patching up their relationship. President Trump is known for that. He sometimes does patch up relationships with people who he's had a feud with. A number of Republican senators come to mind, like Marco Rubio and Ted Cruz, who opposed Trump in 2016 and later on became big supporters of President Trump. But I think there's still going to be some tension between Musk and Trump, most notably around the One Big Beautiful Bill, which just passed the Senate and now is back in the House. Musk has been very outspoken in his opposition to that bill because of what it will do to the United States deficit and the national debt. So there's still some reasons for clash between the two, but Trump has had a few foreign policy successes, and Musk is willing to praise Trump. That's just a factual-based analysis. Are they going to be buddies again? Not anytime soon, but it's certainly possible.
Yes, and Ross, staying with this, of course, a relationship that broke down with provocative statements from either side, but clear rhetoric from Trump in the past couple of days, looking at those subsidies supporting Elon Musk's companies, and then talking about potential deportation. Do you think Musk is scared in this situation?
No, I don't think he's scared because he knows for the contracts that his companies have with the government doesn't have many other options, especially with regard to rockets and the space program. SpaceX really is the premier option for the federal government at the moment. So I think Musk can be confident of that. And with regard to his nationality status and deportation, I'm sure Musk has very good immigration lawyers who are advising him, and they're probably telling him that he need not worry, that his naturalization process really did comply with all applicable laws and regulations at the time.
Yes, absolutely. Ross, we do have time for one more question on this. We've seen Elon Musk's influence over politics, a relationship that has broken down, but a Department of Government Efficiency which has been set up. Looking at the relationship as a whole, do you think this could be a blueprint for politics moving forward, with a powerful backer, a donor with influence of his own, with a social media platform? Do you think we could see a shifting in the balance in American politics, given the relationship that has played out between Elon Musk and Donald Trump?
Well, I think we've already entered that phase because over the past 10, 15 years, the Supreme Court has made a number of decisions that really ended a lot of the restrictions on donations to political campaigns or associated committees that support candidates. So well-to-do donors can now donate enormous amounts of money to political candidates, and we saw that with Musk's donations to President Trump's campaign throughout 2024. So of course, these wealthy donors, doesn't matter if they're donating to Democrats or to Republicans, of course they're going to have access. That's just the reality of the American political process. That's not going to change. In fact, there's upcoming cases before the Supreme Court that are going to do away with even more restrictions on financial donors to political campaigns. So if anything, well-to-do donors are going to have even more access to political candidates going forward.
Ross Finegold, as always, thank you ever so much for joining us and providing your insight on all of those topics US related. We are going to move on now. An exiled Tibetan spiritual leader, the Dalai Lama, has confirmed that he will have a successor after his death. He has said that only the Gaden Pongdrang Trust, which he founded, had the authority to recognise his future reincarnation, and no one else has any such authority to interfere. He made the long-awaited announcements in the northern Indian town of Dharamshala, where he lives in exile from Chinese rule. Hundreds of followers gathered in Dharamshala to celebrate his 90th birthday this week. China, which annexed Tibet in the 1950s, regards the Dalai Lama as a separatist. It says it has the right to choose his successor. Well, joining us to discuss the significance of this announcement, we of course brought you that press conference a short while ago here on NewsX World. Joining me is Lagyari Namgyal Dolka, who is an MP of the Tibetan Parliament, and he is joining us in exile. Lagyari, thank you ever so much for being here with us. Can you first talk us through the significance of the announcement that we have had from the Dalai Lama today?
Thank you, Joshua, for having me. Thank you for being a medium that is formally announcing, reiterating the fantastic news of affirmation that we as a Tibetan community representing Tibetans inside Tibet and outside Tibet have received today from His Holiness the 14th Dalai Lama, that the institution of Dalai Lama shall continue. We are aware that he's mentioned in the past that it's entirely up to the followers whether the institution shall continue or not. And over the years, with different mediums, we have offered in written and verbal requests and appeals to His Holiness to continue his succession. And today we have received the formal acceptance and affirmation from His Holiness the 14th Dalai Lama that indeed he shall return and come back to us in another human body to continue his endeavors in terms of the legacies that he has achieved so far in this life.
Yes, absolutely. I want to look at a statement that was made. No one else has any such authority to interfere. Can you unpack that for us?
Absolutely. He's made it very clear in today's statement that he stands with the statement that he's made in 2011, September 24th, where he's very categorically specified that the way of succession, the procedure of succession shall be discussed in coming time as per the past tradition. However, one thing that His Holiness the 14th Dalai Lama is very clear is the fact that we are here talking about the reincarnation of His Holiness the 14th Dalai Lama. Hence, it is solely his legitimate decision who and how shall he and where he shall reincarnate in any form of body. Hence, nobody, including his specifically mentioned Chinese Communist Party and the leadership of the PRC, has no authority to intervene in this matter. And he's done so in the past, and today as well, he's repeated that because China over the years, especially in the past, they've made many statements through various policies, like the Order Number 7 that they have passed in 2007, which states that they shall have the authority to accept and declare the reincarnation of any Tibetan Buddhist Lama, including His Holiness the 14th Dalai Lama as well, which is completely absurd. Hence, today we have the affirmation and declaration of His Holiness the 14th Dalai Lama that China and nobody else but Gandhi Porter Institute, which is the office of His Holiness the 14th Dalai Lama, and the members there who will have the sole authority to discuss about and declare the reincarnation of His Holiness the 14th Dalai Lama.
Yes, absolutely. And Lagyari, how do you expect President Xi and the Chinese Communist Party to react to this succession announcement?
We are expecting, as always, that Chinese Communist Party and its leadership and its spokesperson shall rebut to that and declare that they have every authority to intervene when it comes to Tibetan lives, which is absolutely bizarre because we are talking about a government, a dictatorial and authoritarian regime that stands with atheist form of belief, which is completely respectable. But this is an institution which does not believe in the past life and the future life. And now you're talking about intervening in reincarnation of the Tibetan Tukus. So how do they even believe that they could declare something, intervene on a matter that they do not believe in at the first place? And so I think we have received the clear message of His Holiness the 14th Dalai Lama. And if I can just read out one thing that he's mentioned in his 2011 declaration was the fact, the way he ended the statement was he's mentioned that bear in mind that apart from the reincarnation recognized through such legitimate method, which he's mentioned above, no recognition or acceptance should be given to a candidate chosen for political ends by anyone, including those in the People's Republic of China. So here we have it. His Holiness in the past have mentioned this. Today, he's again mentioned that China especially has got no say in it. We know that they'll rebut to that and have their own statement, but it holds no power at all because we're talking about His Holiness the 14th Dalai Lama. Let's begin by seeing Chinese Communist Party accepting the concept of rebirth entirely and the past life and future life, and then begin by recognizing the perhaps the reincarnation of Mao Zedong or Deng Xiaoping, and then perhaps consider a reincarnation of His Holiness the 14th Dalai Lama.
Lagyari Namgyal Dolkar, thank you ever so much for taking the time to speak to us. We will continue to bring you all of the updates on the Dalai Lama's succession as we get them, with potential reaction from the Chinese Communist Party as well. But we move on, and at least 10,000 people have gathered outside of Istanbul City Hall, known as the Saraçhane, on Tuesday to mark the 100th day since the city's popular mayor Ekrem İmamoğlu was jailed in what critics are calling a politically motivated graft probe. The rally, organised by Turkey's main opposition CHP party, drew people from across the city, demanding İmamoğlu's immediate release and protesting what they see as President Recep Tayyip Erdogan's continued crackdown on his political rivals. The demonstration comes just hours after police in Izmir, another opposition stronghold and Turkey's third largest city, detained more than 120 people linked to the local city hall. Opposition leaders say the arrests are part of an ongoing pattern of intimidation against those who challenge Erdogan's rule. Protesters in Istanbul held signs calling for justice and chanted slogans condemning what they claim is the government's misuse of the judiciary to silence dissent. İmamoğlu's removal has sparked a wave of demonstrations in recent weeks, with hundreds of thousands previously rallying at Saraçhane in solidarity. Many see the popular mayor as one of the few opposition figures capable of mounting a serious challenge to Erdogan's grip on power, especially with local elections on the horizon. Security around Istanbul City Hall was heavy, but the protests remained largely peaceful as crowds vowed to continue mass mobilisations until İmamoğlu is freed and local democracy is restored. We head to Africa now, and a Zimbabwean court has dismissed an opposition bid to halt public hearings into one of the country's darkest chapters, the 1980s Zimbabwe Massacre, which left an estimated 20,000 people dead in Matabeleland. The legal challenge was led by Sibingazwe Nkomo, son of the late liberation icon Joshua Nkomo. Those supporters were targeted in the military crackdown ordered by then President Robert Mugabe. The opposition ZAPU party argued that the government-called hearings, led by traditional chiefs, lack legitimacy and should be paused in favour of direct dialogue with the ruling ZANU-PF. Outside the Bulawayo court, Nkomo said the party wants justice and not symbolism, citing torture, rape and starvation used in the crackdown known as Gukurundi. The hearings were announced last year by President Emerson Mnangagwa, who himself served in Mugabe's inner circle during the massacre. The process is meant to lead a national report and potentially financial reparations, but critics say the current efforts risk being a whitewash unless victims are genuinely heard and accountability is ensured. Moving on now, Mexican authorities in Quantis have discovered a shocking scene at a private crematorium. 381 corpses were found thrown indiscriminately across multiple rooms and left uncremated for up to 2 years. Officials say relatives were given other material instead of ashes, and the corpses, though embalmed, were found piled one on top of another on the floor. The state prosecutor blamed the tragedy on carelessness by the crematorium operators, who reportedly exceeded their daily cremation capacity. The owner and administrator of the crematorium are now under investigation, and one of them has already turned himself in. The devastating incident is raising concerns about Mexico's funeral and forensic system, with thousands of killings linked to organised violence each year. Many morgues and crematoriums are overwhelmed, and the limited funding and staffing shortages have only made things worse. The investigation is ongoing, and families are now demanding answers and justice. We head back over to Europe now, and France has officially returned a key military base to Senegal, West Africa, a significant move in its ongoing military withdrawal from the region. The base handed over is a military communications centre in Rufisque, just outside the capital city Dakar. According to a statement from the French embassy, it was transferred to Senegalese authorities on Tuesday. This move came as a part of a broader plan to shut down all French military bases in Senegal by 2025. That directive came from Senegal's president, Bassirou Diomaye Faye. The president has made it clear that France, once the colonial ruler, will now be treated like any other foreign partner. And under that shift, all Senegalese nationals working for the French military are to be dismissed starting on July the 1st. The Rufisque station has been operational since 1960. The same year, Senegal gained its independence. For over 6 decades, it handled communications along the southern Atlantic coast, playing a vital role in French military operations in the region. Senegal has long been viewed as one of France's closest allies in Africa, hosting troops and strategic assets. But under President Faye, there's been a clear push for greater sovereignty, especially in defence and diplomacy. This latest handover follows a series of base transfers that began in March, signalling the start of what could be the end of France's permanent military presence in Senegal. It's part of a larger pattern across Western Africa, where several countries are reassessing military partnerships with former colonial powers. For now, the symbolic and strategic handovers continue as Senegal reclaims control of its military infrastructure and redraws the lines of its international alliances. Over to Poland, where the Supreme Court has officially validated last month's presidential election, confirming the victory of nationalist candidate Karol Nawrocki. Despite nearly 56,000 complaints and growing legal controversy, Nawrocki, backed by the Conservative Law and Justice Party, won 51% of the June 1st runoff vote, defeating pro-EU Warsaw Mayor Rafael Trzaskowski by around 369,000 votes. But opposition leaders and prosecutors alleged vote tampering at multiple polling stations, demanding a national recount. The court's exceptional supervision chamber dismissed most of the protests, calling them template-based efforts to paralyse the judiciary. Only 13 stations were recounted, with prosecutors later acknowledging some vote switching, mostly in Nawrocki's favour. Despite that, the Supreme Court said the overall result stands and Nawrocki will be sworn in on August the 6th. Prime Minister Donald Tusk acknowledged the court's authority but slammed the legitimacy of the chamber issuing the ruling, a body previously deemed unlawful by the European Court of Human Rights. Justice Minister Adam Bodnar, who had sought the removal of the chamber's judges, now warns of a facade process and is sending prosecutors to further probe election irregularities. Meanwhile, calls to delay Nawrocki's inauguration have been dismissed by parliamentary leaders. The ruling marks a new flashpoint in Poland's ongoing struggle between EU-aligned reformers and nationalist institutions reshaped under the previous government. Moving on, and a major United Nations conference in Spain has highlighted the escalating debt crisis facing developing nations, with over 100 countries gathering in Seville to call for urgent action. UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres warned that the global debt system is unsustainable and unfair, with developing countries now paying $1.4 trillion each year in debt repayments, the highest level in 2 decades. Speaking at the summit, leaders from the global south, including Kenya and Senegal, called for a complete overhaul of the international financial system. Low-income nations often face interest rates double those of rich countries, and spend more on debt than on healthcare. The Seville commitment urges creditors to allow loan repayment pauses during climate disasters, expand local currency lending, and enhance global debt transparency through a World Bank database. While the US did not sign the agreement, activists and NGOs continue to push for full debt cancellation, warning that the global North's commitments remain insufficient to break the cycle of poverty, injustice and climate-induced disaster. Let's now have a listen to what the Spanish Economy Minister, Carlos Cuerpo, has had to say on the matter.
We are bringing two initiatives to the platform. One is a debt swap hub, which is in collaboration with the World Bank, an initiative to try to enhance, to scale up the use of debt swaps. And then another initiative is what we call the Debt Pause Clause Alliance, which is it's an initiative which pretends or intends to actually again join forces with the main creditors around the world to be able to generalize the use of these debt pause clauses that can alleviate the fiscal space for debtor countries when they have a specific crisis hitting them. Always will be part of the solution. For example, with the commitment of the rechanneling of most of our SDRs, we will reach up to 50% rechanneling of these IMF reserve assets, the special drawing rights, and that means that we will be announcing here in Sevilla an additional 1.9 billion US dollars that will be rechanneled to IMF funds that will benefit developing countries.
Let's now head over to South America, and amid a brutal polar cold front sweeping Argentina, 5 people, including a young child, have died from suspected carbon monoxide poisoning in Villa Devoto, a residential district of Buenos Aires. Emergency officials say the victims likely inhaled toxic gas overnight from heating appliances left running to keep warm during the sub-zero temperatures. Alberto Crescenti, director of the city's emergency medical service, said the tragedy came to light when a relative, worried after getting no response, arrived at the home and found the victims lying unconscious on the floor. Firefighters responding to the call confirmed the air inside was unbreathable due to a strong smell of gas, and carbon monoxide leak is believed to be the cause. Among the victims were 2 elderly adults, a couple and a 4-year-old girl. Crescenti said rescuers managed to save a 2-year-old girl, 9-month-old child from the home, who was also pulled out alive and is now in a stable condition. The incident comes as Buenos Aires faces the coldest temperatures in the world for a capital city this week, with a polar air mass blanketing Argentina. Authorities are once again urging families to ensure proper ventilation when using gas heaters and to have appliances checked regularly as the country braces for more bitter cold in the days ahead. Moving on to Oceania now, a massive data breach has hit Australia's flagship airline. Quantis says hackers accessed a system containing personal data of nearly 6 million customers. The airline confirmed the breach after detecting what it called unusual activity on a third-party platform earlier this week. The breach reportedly includes names, phone numbers, email addresses, birth dates and frequent flyer numbers. However, Quantis says no credit card information, passport numbers or personal financial details have been exposed. In a statement released today, Quantis said the stolen data is likely to be significant in volume. The airline has taken what it calls immediate steps to secure its systems and is now working closely with Australian cyber authorities. Meanwhile, the incident has been reported to the Australian Cybersecurity Centre, Federal Police and the Office of the Australian Information Commissioner. Group CEO Vanessa Hudson apologised to customers, saying our customers trust us with their personal information and we take that responsibility seriously. She added that the airline is directly contacting affected customers and will provide ongoing support. This cyber attack adds to Quantis's growing list of challenges. Previously, the airline has faced major reputational damage from controversial ticket sales during the COVID-19 pandemic to lobbying efforts against rival Qatar Airways. Not only that, but the breach also comes just days after the FBI in the US warned that a cybercriminal group called Scattered Spider is now targeting airlines. The group is known for impersonating employees and launching ransomware attacks to steal data and demand extortion payments. As Quantis investigates the full scope of the breach, concerns grow over how secure airline customer data truly is and what more needs to be done to protect it. We'll head back over to North America now, and in a major policy turn, the University of Pennsylvania has agreed to ban all transgender athletes from its women's sports teams following a federal TITLIX investigation tied to the controversy over swimmer Leah Thomas, the first openly transgender athlete to win the NCAA women's title in 2022. Authorities say that by allowing Leah Thomas to compete in the women's swim team, the university denied biological females a fair chance at records and titles. As part of the settlement, UPENN will now remove Thomas's records from the books, restore titles to other swimmers, and issue written apologies to those affected. The university must also adopt a biological definition of female when it comes to team participation, essentially banning trans women from women's teams moving forward. This follows a recent executive order signed by President Donald Trump earlier this year, threatening to pull federal funding from schools that allow transgender women in women's sport. For now, UPENN says it will fully comply with federal orders, and the case may now set a precedent for other universities across the country. This is part of a wider wave of new policies at both the state and federal level, reshaping how schools and sports teams define gender and participation. Well, that's all we have time for, but we'll continue to bring you all of the latest news from across the globe here on NewsX World.